The conference room on the 14th floor of Harmonium Hall smelled like old wood polish and broken dreams. Maya Chen stood outside the heavy oak doors, her violin case gripped so tightly in her left hand that her knuckles had gone white. Through the frosted glass panel, she could see the shadowy figures of the audition panel, 7 silhouettes arranged behind a long table like judges at a tribunal. She had been waiting in this hallway for 40 minutes, watching other musicians emerge with expressions that ranged from cautiously hopeful to openly devastated. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Maya had not planned to be here. 3 months ago, she had been working the breakfast shift at her aunt's dim sum restaurant in Seattle's International District, balancing trays of hargao and siu mai while mentally calculating whether her paycheck would cover both rent and her student loan payment. The violin in her closet had been gathering dust for nearly 2 years, ever since she had dropped out of the conservatory program that was supposed to launch her career. That decision had come after her father's construction accident left him unable to work, forcing Maya to choose between her musical education and her family's survival. It had not felt like much of a choice at all. The morning everything changed had started unremarkably. Maya had been refilling tea at table 7 when she overheard 2 customers discussing an orchestra. The older woman, who came in every Tuesday for kanji, was reading aloud from her phone about the Seattle Metropolitan Symphony's emergency search for a new second violin. Their previous musician had accepted a position in Vienna with only 2 weeks' notice, leaving them desperately short-staffed before their ambitious winter season. The auditions were open to anyone, regardless of background or formal training. No application fees. No preliminary recordings. Just show up and play. Maya had not intended to eavesdrop, but something about the conversation had made her pause mid-pour. The younger woman at the table had laughed and said it was pointless for amateurs to apply. The symphony was one of the most prestigious on the West Coast. They would obviously hire someone with connections, someone from the right schools, someone who had never had to choose between practicing scales and paying rent. The older woman had agreed, noting that ordinary people did not get opportunities like that. Those positions went to people whose parents could afford private lessons since childhood. That evening, Maya had pulled her violin from the closet. The case was covered in a thin layer of dust, and when she opened it, the instrument inside looked almost accusatory. She had loved this violin once, had saved for 3 years to buy it from a luthier in Vancouver. The wood still gleamed, though the strings needed replacing. Maya had lifted it to her shoulder, feeling the familiar weight settle against her collarbone, and drawn the bow across the strings. The sound that emerged was scratchy and out of tune, but underneath the neglect, the voice of the instrument remained true. She had not planned to practice. She had not planned to spend the next 3 weeks arriving at the restaurant 2 hours early so she could run through repertoire in the storage room before her shift. She had not planned to call the symphony office and add her name to the audition list. But somehow, all of those things had happened, and now Maya was standing outside this door, about to walk into a room where 7 professionals would judge whether her 2-year absence from serious music had destroyed whatever talent she once possessed. The door opened, and a young man emerged. He was probably Maya's age, mid-20s, but he carried himself with the confidence of someone who had never questioned whether he belonged in spaces like this. His violin case bore stickers from summer festivals in Aspen and Tanglewood. He did not look at Maya as he passed, but she heard him mutter something to someone on his phone about the panel being unnecessarily harsh. A woman appeared in the doorway. She wore all black and carried a clipboard, her expression professionally neutral. "Maya Chen?" Maya nodded, not trusting her voice. "You'll have 10 minutes. The panel will ask you to perform 2 prepared pieces and potentially some sight reading. Do you have any questions before we begin?" Maya shook her head. The woman stepped aside, and Maya walked into the room that would either resurrect or permanently bury her musical aspirations. The conference room was larger than it had appeared from the hallway. The far wall was entirely windows, offering a view of Elliott Bay and the distant Olympic Mountains. The audition panel sat behind a table positioned to catch the afternoon light, which meant Maya would be performing with the sun at her back, her face partially shadowed. She wondered if this was intentional, a way to keep the audition as anonymous as possible, or simply an accident of room assignment. The 7 panel members watched her approach. 6 of them had expressions that ranged from politely attentive to mildly bored. They had probably been listening to auditions all day, hearing dozens of competent musicians play the same standard repertoire. But the 7th panelist, a man in his early 60s with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses, was staring at Maya with an intensity that made her skin prickle. He sat at the center of the table, and the others seemed to defer to him in subtle ways, angling their bodies slightly in his direction, waiting for him to speak first. "Miss Chen," the man said, glancing down at the papers in front of him. His voice was crisp and precise, each word carefully articulated. "I see you attended the Berkshire Conservatory for 2 years but did not complete your degree. Can you explain the gap in your training?" Maya had prepared for this question, but the man's tone made it clear he was not asking out of curiosity. He was testing her. "Family circumstances required me to leave the program. I've been working to support my parents, but I've continued practicing independently when possible." "When possible," the man repeated, as if tasting the words. "Music at this level, Miss Chen, requires more than occasional practice. It demands complete dedication. The symphony's winter season includes Mahler's 5th, Shostakovich's 10th, and a contemporary commission that has not yet been publicly performed. These are technically and emotionally demanding works. We cannot afford to hire someone whose commitment is conditional." One of the other panelists, a woman with short gray hair, shifted uncomfortably. "Michael, perhaps we should hear her play before making assumptions about her commitment." Michael ignored the interruption, keeping his eyes fixed on Maya. "I've been with this symphony for 34 years, Miss Chen. I've served as concertmaster for the last 12. In that time, I've seen countless talented musicians fail because they treated music as something that could coexist with other priorities. It cannot. Either you are a serious musician, or you are someone who plays violin as a hobby. There is no middle ground." Maya felt her grip tighten on her violin case. She recognized what was happening. This man had already decided she did not belong here, had already written her off as someone who would waste the panel's time. She could walk out now, save herself the humiliation of performing for someone who had no intention of hearing her fairly. Or she could prove him wrong. "What would you like me to play?" Maya asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Michael leaned back in his chair, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. It was not a kind smile. "Let's begin with Bach. The Chaconne from Partita No. 2 in D minor. I assume you're familiar with it." The request sent a jolt through Maya's body. The Chaconne was one of the most demanding pieces in the violin repertoire, a 15-minute meditation on a single theme that required technical mastery and profound musical understanding. It was the piece violinists played when they wanted to prove they could handle anything. It was also the piece Maya had been obsessively practicing in the restaurant storage room for the past 3 weeks, not because she thought anyone would ask for it, but because it was the last piece she had performed before leaving conservatory. She needed to know if she could still play it. "I'm familiar with it," Maya said. "Excellent." Michael folded his hands on the table in front of him. "Before you begin, Miss Chen, I want to be clear about something. The Chaconne is not a piece that tolerates imperfection. One wrong note, one rushed phrase, one moment where you lose the thread of the musical argument, and we'll know you're not ready for this position. Play it flawlessly, or don't play it at all." The gray-haired woman frowned. "Michael, that's hardly fair. Even professionals make small mistakes during live performances." "Then perhaps Miss Chen should demonstrate that she's capable of more than small mistakes," Michael said coldly. "She has one chance to prove she belongs here. I'm simply making the stakes clear." Maya walked to the center of the room, her heart hammering against her ribs. She set down her case and removed her violin, taking her time with the process, using the familiar routine to center herself. She checked the tuning, made minor adjustments, rosined her bow. The panel waited silently. Maya could feel Michael's eyes on her, watching for any sign of nervousness or doubt. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She lifted the violin to her shoulder and closed her eyes for a moment, remembering the first time she had heard the chaconne. She had been 14, sitting in the back of a concert hall in Vancouver with her father, who had taken her to hear a famous violinist whose name she could no longer remember. But she remembered the music. She remembered how the opening notes had seemed to contain entire worlds of emotion, how the variations had built and transformed and returned to their source, how the final chord had rung out like both an ending and a beginning. She had turned to her father with tears streaming down her face and whispered that she wanted to learn to play like that. He had squeezed her hand and said that if she was willing to work for it, she could learn to play anything. Maya opened her eyes and began. The opening notes of the chaconne emerged from her violin like a voice speaking across centuries. Bach had written this piece after returning home to find his wife dead, and some scholars believed it was a meditation on grief and loss. But Maya had always heard something else in it, something more complex than simple sadness. She heard questions without answers, faith tested and rebuilt, beauty found in the midst of suffering. She heard her father lying in a hospital bed, asking her not to give up on music. She heard herself making the choice to leave conservatory, knowing it was right and hating it anyway. She heard 2 years of silence, of violin left untouched, of talent left to wither. And then she heard herself in the restaurant storage room at 5 in the morning, relearning what her hands already knew, discovering that the music had never really left her. It had been waiting. Maya's fingers moved across the fingerboard with precision she had not known she still possessed. The double stops rang out clearly, each note perfectly in tune. The arpeggios flowed smoothly, building tension and releasing it in carefully measured doses. She was playing from memory, but it did not feel like memorization. It felt like the music was moving through her, using her hands and body as instruments to express something that existed beyond notation. She could sense the panel's attention shifting. The bored expressions were gone. Even Michael had leaned forward slightly, his earlier hostness replaced by something that looked almost like surprise. But Maya barely registered their reactions. She was inside the music now, following the logic of Bach's variations as they spiraled outward from the central theme, each one exploring a different emotional territory. The piece moved into its faster middle sections, where the technical demands increased exponentially. Rapid passages required absolute precision, each note articulated clearly even at speed. Maya's bow arm moved with controlled intensity, her left hand flying across the fingerboard. She could feel sweat forming at her temples, her muscles beginning to protest the extended physical effort, but she pushed through. This was the section where most players started to falter, where the sheer difficulty of maintaining both technical accuracy and musical expression became overwhelming. Maya did not falter. She felt, instead, a strange clarity descending over her. She could hear each note before she played it, could feel the architecture of the piece supporting her, guiding her hands. Time seemed to stretch and compress simultaneously. She was both utterly present in the moment and somehow outside it, watching herself play with distant amazement. The panel was completely still now. The gray-haired woman had tears running down her face. 2 of the other panelists were leaning forward, their expressions intense with concentration. Michael's face had gone blank, unreadable, but his hands were clenched into fists on the table in front of him. The chaconne built toward its final variation, returning to the opening theme but transformed by everything that had come before. This was where the piece revealed its true meaning, in the way it circled back to its beginning and found it changed. Maya played the closing phrases with a tenderness that seemed to make the air in the room shimmer. When the final chord faded into silence, she lowered her violin slowly, suddenly aware of how fast her heart was beating, how her hands were trembling slightly from adrenaline and exhaustion. Nobody spoke. The silence stretched for 5 seconds, then 10. Maya looked at the panel and saw expressions of shock on most of their faces. The gray-haired woman was wiping her eyes. A younger man on the far left was shaking his head slowly, as if trying to reconcile what he had just heard with his prior expectations. Another panelist was staring at Maya like she had materialized from thin air. Michael's face remained unreadable, but Maya noticed that his hands were still clenched, the knuckles white. He cleared his throat, but when he tried to speak, no words emerged. He cleared his throat again, and this time managed to say, "That was acceptable." The gray-haired woman turned to stare at him. "Acceptable? Michael, that was one of the finest performances of the Chaconne I've heard in 20 years of serving on audition panels. It was extraordinary." "It was technically proficient," Michael said, his voice tight. "But technique alone does not make a musician worthy of this orchestra." "What would make her worthy?" another panelist demanded. "She just played 15 minutes of Bach flawlessly while you sat there trying to intimidate her. She didn't miss a single note. Her intonation was perfect. Her interpretation was mature and thoughtful. What more do you want?" Michael's jaw tightened. "I want evidence that this is not simply one well-rehearsed piece. Anyone can practice a single work until they can perform it adequately. True musicianship reveals itself in versatility, in the ability to adapt and respond to unexpected challenges." Maya understood what was happening. Michael had been certain she would fail, had structured his entire approach around humiliating her into giving up. Now that she had not failed, he was scrambling to find new reasons to reject her. She should have felt victorious, but instead she felt a cold anger settling in her chest. This man would never give her a fair chance. No matter what she played, he would find fault with it. "What else would you like to hear?" Maya asked, her voice quiet but steady. Michael smiled, and this time there was no pretense of professionalism in his expression. It was the smile of someone about to deliver a killing blow. "Let's try some sight reading. We'll see how quickly you can adapt to unfamiliar material." He reached into a folder and pulled out several pages of sheet music, which he handed to the woman with the clipboard. She walked them over to Maya, giving her an apologetic look that said she understood exactly what was happening and disapproved but had no power to stop it. Maya took the pages and felt her stomach drop. The music was from a contemporary composition, dense with complex rhythms and unusual notation. Notes clustered together in ways that defied traditional harmonic logic. Time signatures changed every few measures. There were extended techniques indicated, ways of producing sound from the violin that pushed the boundaries of conventional playing. This was not standard repertoire. This was music designed to challenge even experienced professionals who had time to study and practice it. "This is the commission I mentioned earlier," Michael said. "We'll be performing it in January. Take a moment to look it over, and then play the first page." Maya studied the music, her mind racing. She had perhaps 90 seconds to understand what the composer was trying to achieve, to decode the unusual notation, to figure out fingerings for passages that seemed almost unplayable. Around her, the room had gone very quiet. The other panelists were watching Michael with expressions that ranged from uncomfortable to openly hostile, but none of them spoke up. Maya realized they were afraid of him, afraid of his seniority and influence. She closed her eyes for a moment, shutting out the room and the panel and Michael's challenging stare. She thought about her father in the hospital, telling her that music was not about being perfect, it was about being true. She thought about the storage room at 5 in the morning, the way her hands had remembered what her mind had forgotten. She thought about the 2 years she had spent believing she had lost her chance at this life, and the stubborn hope that had brought her to this room despite every logical reason to stay away. Maya opened her eyes, lifted her violin, and began to play. The music was strange and difficult, filled with angular melodies and rhythmic complexities that required intense concentration. But underneath its modern surface, Maya could hear a thread of logic, a compositional structure that gave meaning to what might otherwise have seemed like chaos. She followed that thread, making split-second decisions about interpretation and technique, occasionally stumbling but recovering quickly, pushing forward with determination. She could see Michael watching her, waiting for her to give up, to admit defeat. But Maya had spent 2 years giving up. She had given up her conservatory education, given up her dreams of a performance career, given up the violin itself. She was done giving up. When she reached the end of the first page, she did not stop. She continued into the second page, then the third, sight reading through music that should have been impossible to navigate without extensive preparation. Her playing was not perfect. There were moments where she had to guess at the composer's intentions, places where her technique was not quite equal to the demands of the score. But she did not stop, and she did not break down, and most importantly, she did not surrender to the fear that Michael was trying to instill in her. When she finally lowered her violin, she was breathing hard, her fingers aching from the extended effort. She looked directly at Michael and said, "Would you like to hear more?" The gray-haired woman started laughing, a sound of pure delight. "Michael, I believe she just called your bluff." Michael's face had gone red. "This is not a game." "You're right, it's not," another panelist said. He was a middle-aged man with kind eyes who had been silent throughout the audition. "This is a professional hiring process, and we just witnessed one of the most impressive auditions any of us have seen." Miss Chen performed the chaconne flawlessly under what I would describe as hostile conditions, then sight read through some of the most challenging contemporary music in our repertoire. "I move that we vote on her candidacy immediately." "We have 12 more candidates to hear," Michael protested. "I've heard enough," the gray-haired woman said. "Maya, would you mind waiting in the hallway for a few minutes? We need to discuss this as a panel." Maya nodded, gathering her violin and case. As she walked toward the door, she heard voices rising behind her, the panel erupting into heated discussion. She caught fragments of sentences: "completely inappropriate," "personal bias," "most talented musician we've heard all day." The door closed, muffling the argument. In the hallway, Maya sat down on the bench and let her violin case rest against her legs. Her hands were shaking from adrenaline, and she felt simultaneously exhausted and electrified. She had no idea what would happen next. She had proven herself capable, that much was clear. But she had also made an enemy of the concertmaster, a man whose opinion would carry significant weight in the orchestra's dynamics. The door opened sooner than she expected. The gray-haired woman emerged, her expression carefully neutral. "Maya, could you come back in, please?" Maya followed her into the room. The atmosphere had changed. Several of the panelists looked angry. Michael was staring at the table in front of him, his face still flushed. The kind-eyed man who had spoken up earlier was the one who addressed her. "Miss Chen, the panel has voted, and I'm pleased to offer you the position of second violin with the Seattle Metropolitan Symphony. The appointment is for the remainder of this season, with the possibility of renewal based on your performance. The salary is $52,000 annually, with full benefits including health insurance. We'd need you to start rehearsals next Monday. Do you accept?" Maya felt the words wash over her like a wave. $52,000. Health insurance. A chance to play music professionally, to do the thing she had convinced herself was lost forever. She thought about her father, still recovering from his accident, still unable to work. She thought about her mother, exhausted from double shifts at the hospital. She thought about rent and student loans and all the practical concerns that had forced her to abandon music in the first place. And then she thought about the chaconne, about the way the music had moved through her body like coming home, about the 2 years she had spent pretending she did not miss it every single day. "I accept," Maya said. The kind-eyed man smiled. "Welcome to the symphony, Miss Chen. I'm David Park, Principal Viola. This is Ellen Rodriguez, she's second chair cello and heads our personnel committee. We'll get you set up with all the necessary paperwork and rehearsal schedules. Our first rehearsal with you will be Monday morning at 9. Maya shook his hand, then Ellen's, then worked her way around the table meeting the other panelists. When she reached Michael, he stood but did not extend his hand. He looked at her with an expression she could not quite read, something between resentment and a begrudging acknowledgement. "I expect you to be prepared for Monday," he said. "We'll be starting with the Mahler, and it's technically demanding. If you're unable to keep up with the section, we'll know immediately." "I'll be prepared," Maya said. Michael nodded once, then gathered his papers and left the room without another word. Ellen waited until he was gone before speaking quietly to Maya. "I apologize for Michael's behavior today. He's been with the orchestra for a very long time, and sometimes he forgets that his job is to support musicians, not tear them down. You handled yourself with remarkable professionalism, and your playing was genuinely extraordinary. We're lucky to have you." Maya felt tears threatening and blinked them back. "Thank you. That means more than you know." David pulled out his phone. "Let me give you my number. If you have any questions before Monday, or if you need anything at all, don't hesitate to reach out. We take care of our musicians here. Well, most of us do." Over the next hour, Maya signed contracts, filled out tax forms, and received a thick packet of information about the orchestra's policies and procedures. Ellen walked her through the rehearsal schedule, explaining that they practiced 4 days a week with performances typically on Thursday evenings and Saturday afternoons. The winter season would include 6 different programs, each requiring 2 weeks of intensive rehearsal. It was demanding work, but it was exactly what Maya had dreamed of doing since she was 14 years old. As she left Harmonium Hall, stepping out into the cool Seattle afternoon, Maya pulled out her phone and called her father. He answered on the second ring. "Baba," she said, and her voice broke on the word. "I got it. I got the position." There was a moment of silence, and then she heard her father crying on the other end of the line. "I knew you would," he said. "I always knew you would come back to music. Tell me everything." Maya walked through downtown Seattle as she recounted the audition, describing Michael's hostility, the impossible challenges he had thrown at her, the way the music had felt when she played it. Her father listened without interrupting, and when she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "This man, the one who tried to break you," her father said finally. "He will be a problem. I know. But you did not let him stop you today. And you will not let him stop you tomorrow, or the day after that. You are my daughter. You know how to work hard, and you know how to survive difficult people. You will be brilliant, and eventually even he will have to see it." Maya felt fresh tears on her face, but she was smiling. "I'm scared, Baba. What if I can't keep up? What if I'm not as good as they think I am?" "Then you will practice until you are," her father said simply. "That is what musicians do. You will wake up early and stay up late and work until your fingers hurt, and one day you will realize that you belong there. That day might not come immediately. But it will come." That evening, Maya sat in her small apartment and unpacked her violin for the second time that day. She pulled out the sheet music from Mahler's Fifth Symphony, which she had downloaded and printed after leaving the audition. The second violin part was dense with notes, full of exposed passages where every mistake would be audible to the entire orchestra. Michael had been right about one thing: this was not music that tolerated carelessness. Maya set up a music stand and began working through the first movement, slowly at first, getting familiar with the rhythms and fingerings. She practiced until her upstairs neighbor pounded on the floor, then switched to silent practice, fingering through passages without drawing the bow across the strings. At midnight, she forced herself to stop and try to sleep, but her mind kept racing with thoughts of Monday's rehearsal, of Michael's critical gaze, of the enormous responsibility she had just accepted. She thought about the other musicians in the orchestra, wondered if they would welcome her or resent her for taking a position they might have wanted for their friends. She thought about her aunt at the restaurant, who had been generous about adjusting Maya's work schedule but would need to find someone to replace her at the breakfast shift. She thought about her student loan payments, which would finally be manageable with her symphony salary. She thought about her mother, who had supported Maya's musical education even when money was tight, who had never suggested that violin lessons were impractical or foolish. And she thought about Michael, about the way he had tried to humiliate her into giving up, about the challenge she had seen in his eyes. She did not know why he had taken such an instant dislike to her, whether it was personal or simply his way of testing all new musicians. But she knew, with absolute certainty, that he would be watching her closely, waiting for her to prove that his initial judgment had been correct, that she was not worthy of the position she had been given. Maya rolled over and stared at the ceiling, watching shadows from passing cars move across the plaster. She had worked so hard to get here, had sacrificed so much and fought through so many obstacles. but she was beginning to understand that getting the position was only the first challenge. Keeping it, proving herself day after day in front of skeptical colleagues and a hostile concertmaster, would require strength she was not sure she possessed. But then again, 3 months ago she had not been sure she still knew how to play violin. 2 weeks ago, she had not been sure she was brave enough to walk into that audition room. And this afternoon, she had not been sure she could sight-read contemporary music that was designed to challenge professionals with years more experience than she had. She had been wrong about all of those things. Maybe, Maya thought as she finally drifted towards sleep, she was wrong about this too. Maybe she was stronger than she knew. Maybe she could survive Michael's antagonism and the pressure of professional performance and the weight of expectations. Maybe she could prove that a girl who had spent 2 years serving dim sum and practicing in storage rooms could stand on stage with one of the country's most prestigious symphonies and hold her own. Monday morning would tell her which version of herself was true. The one who doubted and feared and wanted to hide, or the one who had played the chaconne flawlessly while a hostile panelist waited for her to fail. Maya suspected she would spend the next few days discovering that both versions existed simultaneously, that courage and fear were not opposites but companions on the same journey. Outside her window, Seattle was settling into its nighttime rhythm. The sound of traffic never fully disappeared in this city, creating a constant low hum that Maya had learned to find comforting. In 4 days, she would wake up before dawn and make her way to Harmonium Hall for her first rehearsal as a professional symphony musician. She would unpack her violin in a room full of strangers, take her seat in the second violin section, and prove to Michael and everyone else that she deserved to be there. But for now, she let herself feel the fullness of what had happened today. She had auditioned for one of the most prestigious orchestras on the West Coast. She had been challenged by a hostile panelist who had wanted her to fail. She had played Bach chaconne under impossible pressure and had not missed a single note. She had sight-read contemporary music that should have been beyond her capabilities. And she had been offered the position. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new doubts. But tonight, Maya Chen allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The alarm on Maya's phone went off at 5:30 Monday morning, pulling her from a restless sleep filled with dreams of missed notes and hostile faces. She lay in bed for a moment, staring at the ceiling and trying to quiet the panic rising in her chest. In 3.5 hours, she would walk into her first professional orchestra rehearsal. In 3.5 hours, she would sit among musicians who had been playing together for years, who knew each other's rhythms and tendencies, who had earned their positions through traditional paths that did not include 2-year absences in restaurant storage rooms. Maya forced herself out of bed and into the shower, letting the hot water ease the tension in her shoulders. She had practiced the Mahler until her fingers were numb over the weekend, working through every challenging passage until she could play them cleanly even when exhausted. She had listened to recordings of the piece performed by major orchestras, studying how different conductors shaped the tempo and dynamics. She had marked her part with fingerings and bowings, making detailed notes about where to breathe and where to push forward. She had done everything possible to prepare, but preparation could not quiet the voice in her head that whispered she did not belong. She dressed carefully in black pants and a dark blue sweater, the kind of understated professional attire she had seen other musicians wearing. She ate breakfast without tasting it, her stomach too tight with nerves to register hunger. At 7:15, she packed her violin case and left her apartment, catching the bus that would take her downtown to Harmonium Hall. Seattle was just beginning to wake up. The sky was gray with typical autumn cloud cover, and a light rain misted the bus windows. Maya watched the city pass by, familiar streets that looked different this morning, charged with significance. Everything felt slightly unreal, like she was watching herself from outside her body, observing a character in a story rather than living her own life. Harmonium Hall looked different at 8:30 in the morning than it had during her audition. The grand entrance hall was quiet, lacking the bustling energy of audition day. A security guard nodded at Maya as she entered, and she realized she would need to get some kind of access badge now that she was staff. The thought sent a thrill through her that was equal parts excitement and terror. She found the rehearsal room on the second floor, following the sound of instruments warming up. The door was propped open, and Maya paused just outside, taking in the scene. The room was large and acoustically designed, with high ceilings and carefully positioned panels to manage the sound. Music stands were arranged in the traditional orchestra formation, with strings in front, woodwinds behind them, brass further back, and percussion at the rear. Perhaps 20 musicians had already arrived and were scattered throughout the space, unpacking instruments, rosining bows, running through scales and difficult passages. Maya recognized Ellen Rodriguez, the cellist who had been kind during her audition. Ellen was talking with another woman, laughing at something her companion had said. David Park, the principal viola who had offered Maya his phone number, was tuning his instrument with intense concentration. And there, near the front of the violin section, stood Michael, the concertmaster who had tried to destroy her confidence during the audition. Michael was speaking with two other violinists, gesturing at something in a musical score. He had not yet noticed Maya's arrival, and she took advantage of the moment to study him. In the brighter light of the rehearsal room, she could see details she had missed during the audition. His silver hair was carefully combed, and his posture was rigidly upright, suggesting years of attention to physical discipline. His violin case bore the marks of extensive travel, covered in stickers from international music festivals and concert halls. This was someone who had dedicated his entire life to music, who had probably never questioned whether he belonged in elite musical spaces. Ellen looked up and saw Maya hovering in the doorway. Her face broke into a warm smile, and she excused herself from her conversation to approach. "Maya. I'm so glad you're here. Come on in, let me introduce you to some people." The kindness in Ellen's voice loosened something in Maya's chest. She stepped fully into the room, and several musicians looked up with curiosity. Ellen led her toward a woman in her 30s with dark curly hair who was adjusting the height of her music stand. "Maya, this is Simone Davis, she's been with our second violin section for 6 years. Simone, this is Maya Chen, she's joining us for the winter season." Simone's smile was genuine and reached her eyes. "Welcome to the chaos. Don't let the first rehearsal intimidate you. It always takes a while for us to shake off the rust after a break. You're filling the spot that Tyler left, right?" Maya nodded. "I understand he took a position in Vienna." "Lucky bastard," Simone said with affection. "Tyler was great, really solid musician. We're going to miss him, but Ellen tells me you played an incredible audition. I'm looking forward to hearing you." The words were welcoming, but Maya caught the subtle assessment in Simone's eyes. This was someone reserving judgment, waiting to see if Maya could actually deliver at the professional level. Fair enough, Maya thought. She would have to prove herself through her playing, not through friendly conversation. Ellen continued the introductions, bringing Maya around to meet other members of the orchestra. There was James, a bass player with an easy laugh who immediately offered to show Maya where the musicians' lounge was located. There was Keiko, a flutist who asked careful questions about Maya's training and background, her tone polite but probing. There was Marcus, a horn player who barely looked up from his warm-up exercises, acknowledging Maya with only a brief nod. As they made their way through the room, Maya became aware of Michael watching them. He had stopped his conversation and was observing her interactions with the other musicians, his expression unreadable. When Ellen finally led Maya toward the violin section, Michael set down his instrument and approached. "Miss Chen," he said, his voice carrying the same crisp formality it had during the audition. "I trust you've prepared the Mahler as I suggested." "I have," Maya said, keeping her voice steady. "Excellent. You'll be sitting third stand, second violin section. That's the fourth chair from the front on the right side. Your stand partner will be Simone, whom you've already met. I expect you to follow her lead on bowings and interpretation until you're more familiar with our style." There was nothing explicitly hostile in his words, but something in his tone made it clear this was a warning rather than helpful advice. Maya was being told to stay in her place, to not try to stand out or assert herself. She met his gaze and nodded once, refusing to show any sign of intimidation. David appeared at Maya's elbow, holding a folder of sheet music. "I grabbed your parts from the office. We're starting with Mahler today, but you'll want to look through the Shostakovich too. It's our next program, and there are some truly evil passages in the second violin part. Evil is putting it mildly, Simone said, joining them. The Shostakovich is what separates the professionals from the amateurs. No offense to amateurs, but this piece will destroy you if you're not technically solid. Michael was still watching Maya, waiting for some reaction. She took the folder from David and thanked him, then moved toward her assigned seat. As she unpacked her violin and arranged her music on the stand, she could feel eyes on her from various parts of the room. The new musician always attracted attention, she knew, but there was an extra layer of scrutiny here. Word had spread about her audition, about Michael's hostility and her flawless performance of the chaconne. People were curious to see if she could sustain that level of playing in a professional setting. The conductor arrived at precisely 9 o'clock. She was a woman in her mid-50s named Rebecca Chen, no relation to Maya despite the shared surname. Rebecca had a reputation as one of the finest conductors on the West Coast, known for her precise technique and demanding standards. She greeted the orchestra warmly but efficiently, making a few announcements about the season schedule before turning to the matter at hand. "Let's start with the Mahler," Rebecca said, opening her score on the conductor's podium. "First movement from the beginning. I know we're rusty, so this is just to get reacquainted with the piece. Don't worry about perfection today." The orchestra settled into position, instruments raised and ready. Rebecca lifted her baton, and Maya felt her entire body tense with anticipation. This was it. The moment when she would discover whether she truly belonged here or whether her audition had been a fluke, a one-time performance she could never replicate. Rebecca's baton descended, and the orchestra began to play. The opening of Mahler's Fifth Symphony emerged with the raw power of a trumpet fanfare, a call to attention that seemed to announce something momentous. Maya's entrance did not come until several measures in, giving her time to settle into the sound of the orchestra around her. She had listened to recordings, but nothing prepared her for the physical experience of being surrounded by live musicians, the way the sound seemed to vibrate through her entire body. When the second violin section's entrance arrived, Maya lifted her bow and joined the collective sound. Immediately, she felt the difference between solo playing and ensemble work. In an orchestra, the individual voice had to blend with others, matching tone and style and timing with absolute precision. She listened carefully to Simone beside her, adjusting her bowing to match her stand partner's movements, trying to disappear into the section sound. They worked through the first movement slowly, stopping frequently as Rebecca made corrections and suggestions. The conductor's ear was incredibly sharp, catching intonation issues and rhythmic inconsistencies that would have escaped a less trained listener. Several times she called out specific sections, asking them to repeat passages until they achieved the blend and precision she wanted. Maya focused intensely, trying to absorb everything at once. She had to watch the conductor's gestures, follow the markings in her music, listen to the musicians around her, and produce a clean, beautiful tone from her violin. It was like learning a new language while speaking it for the first time, overwhelming and exhilarating in equal measure. Halfway through the movement, they reached a section where the second violins carried the melody, a lyrical passage that required sensitivity and perfect intonation. Maya felt the weight of responsibility as her section moved to the foreground. She could sense Michael's attention from the concertmaster's chair, could almost feel him waiting for her to make a mistake. She did not make a mistake. The passage emerged cleanly, her tone blending seamlessly with the other second violins. When they finished the phrase, Rebecca nodded with satisfaction and moved on to the next section. They worked for 90 minutes before taking their first break. Maya's fingers were sore and her back ached from the sustained concentration, but she felt a sense of cautious optimism. She had not embarrassed herself. She had kept up with the section, matched Simone's bowings, and produced a sound that did not stand out for any negative reason. It was not brilliant, but it was competent, and competence was enough for a first rehearsal. During the break, Maya stood near her chair, not sure whether she should join the other musicians who were gathering in small conversational clusters. Simone solved the problem by approaching with 2 paper cups of water. "You did well," Simone said, handing Maya one of the cups. "Really solid playing, especially for your first day." I was watching your hands during that lyrical section, and your vibrato is gorgeous. Really warm and controlled. Maya felt relief flood through her. Thank you. I was nervous about blending with the section. You blended perfectly. That's actually impressive, because most new players either try too hard to stand out or they play so timidly that they disappear completely. You found the right balance. Simone took a sip of her water and glanced toward the front of the room, where Michael was in conversation with Rebecca. Michael's been watching you like a hawk, but I haven't seen him frown even once, which for him is basically a standing ovation. Maya followed Simone's gaze and saw that Michael was indeed looking in their direction, though he quickly turned his attention back to Rebecca when he noticed Maya watching. He doesn't seem to like me very much. Michael doesn't like anyone very much, Simone said with a dry laugh. He's been concertmaster here for over a decade, and in that time he's developed a reputation for being brilliant and impossible in equal measure. Don't take his attitude personally. He treats everyone like they're auditioning for the privilege of sharing a stage with him. Ellen said something similar after my audition. Simone raised an eyebrow. I heard your audition was intense. David told me Michael tried to break you with the chaconne, and you played it perfectly. Maya shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. I got lucky. It's a piece I know well. Nobody plays the chaconne perfectly by luck, Simone said firmly. That piece is a test of everything a violinist can do. The fact that you nailed it under pressure tells me you're the real deal. She paused, then added more quietly, but I should warn you, Michael doesn't like being proven wrong. He made a judgment about you during your audition, decided you didn't belong here, and then you forced him to reconsider. Men like him don't handle that gracefully. Before Maya could respond, Rebecca called the orchestra back to position. They spent the rest of the morning working through the remainder of the first movement, then briefly touching on the second movement before Rebecca released them for lunch. Maya's hands were cramping by the time they finished, her forearms tight from the sustained physical effort of playing. The musicians dispersed quickly, some heading to the lounge, others leaving the building to grab food from nearby restaurants. Maya packed up her violin slowly, trying to decide what to do. She had brought lunch from home, but eating alone in the rehearsal room seemed pathetic. At the same time, inserting herself into established social groups felt presumptuous. Ellen solved the problem by appearing at Maya's side with an invitation. A few of us usually grab lunch at the cafe across the street. Want to join? The cafe was a small place called Maestro's, clearly accustomed to serving musicians from the symphony. The walls were decorated with framed concert posters and photographs of famous conductors. Ellen led Maya to a large table where David, Simone, James the bass player, and Keiko the flutist were already seated. They made space for Maya and Ellen, and within moments the conversation flowed into familiar territory. The musicians discussed the morning's rehearsal, debating Rebecca's tempo choices for certain passages and commiserating about particularly challenging sections in the Mahler. Maya listened more than she spoke, content to observe the group dynamics and learn how these musicians related to each other. So Maya, James said during a lull in the conversation, Ellen tells us you were at Berkshire Conservatory. Did you study with anyone we might know? Maya felt the table's attention shift to her. I worked primarily with Professor Yamamoto for violin technique, and I took some chamber music courses with the Levinson String Quartet when they were in residence. Keiko's eyes widened. The Levinson Quartet? They're incredible. I heard them perform at Carnegie Hall a few years ago, and it was transcendent. They were wonderful teachers, Maya said. Very demanding, but they really understood how to develop musical interpretation alongside technical skill. Why did you leave the program? David asked. The question was not unkind, but it carried weight. This was the elephant in the room, the gap in Maya's resume that everyone was curious about. Maya had prepared for this question, but it still felt uncomfortable to answer. My father had a serious accident that left him unable to work. My family needed financial support, and I couldn't justify staying in an expensive program when they were struggling. It was the right decision at the time, even though it was difficult. The table was quiet for a moment, and Maya worried she had revealed too much, made herself seem like a charity case. But then Ellen reached over and squeezed her hand briefly. "That must have been incredibly hard," Ellen said. "But it sounds like you made a loving choice. Family comes first." "It does," Maya agreed. "And I'm grateful I was able to help. But I also never stopped missing music. Working at my aunt's restaurant was fine, but it wasn't what I was meant to do." Simone nodded thoughtfully. "And now you're here, playing with a major symphony. That's quite a comeback story." "I'm still writing the comeback story," Maya said. "This morning was just the first page." James laughed. "Well, from what I could hear, the first page is pretty damn good. Your intonation is spot on, which is more than I can say for some people who've been in this orchestra for years." The conversation moved on to other topics, but Maya felt something shift. These musicians were not just tolerating her presence, they were genuinely welcoming her into their community. It did not erase the challenges ahead, the need to prove herself day after day, but it made those challenges feel less isolating. When they returned to the rehearsal hall for the afternoon session, Maya felt marginally more confident. She took her seat next to Simone and prepared for what Rebecca had announced would be a detailed sectional work on some of the Mahler's most technically demanding passages. The afternoon was brutal. Rebecca separated the orchestra into sections and worked with each group individually, drilling them on precision and interpretation. When it was the second violin section's turn, she pushed them hard, demanding perfect unison and intonation. Maya's fingers ached and her shoulders burned, but she refused to let fatigue show. Michael appeared during the second violin sectional, ostensibly to observe, but Maya suspected he had come specifically to watch her. He stood off to the side, his face impassive as Rebecca put the section through their paces. When they struggled with a particularly fast passage, Rebecca stopped them and addressed the group. "The tempo here is non-negotiable," she said. "Mahler wrote this fast for a reason, and we need to deliver it. Let's break it down, for measures at a time, very slowly at first, then gradually increase the speed." They worked through the passage methodically, building from a crawl to the actual tempo. Maya concentrated fiercely, her fingers flying over the fingerboard as they finally achieved the speed Rebecca wanted. It was not perfect, but it was close. "Better," Rebecca said. "Maya, can you play that passage alone so the section can hear the articulation more clearly?" Maya's stomach dropped. This was exactly what she had been afraid of, being singled out while Michael watched. But there was no refusing. She lifted her violin and played the passage solo, trying to project confidence she did not entirely feel. The notes emerged cleanly, each one articulated with precision. When she finished, Rebecca nodded with approval. "Exactly like that. Everyone hear how clear each note was? That's the standard we need." Maya lowered her violin and snuck a glance at Michael. His expression had not changed, but something in his posture seemed tense. She wondered if he was angry that she had played well, if every successful moment on her part felt like a personal defeat to him. The sectional ended, and they returned to full orchestra rehearsal for the final hour. They ran through the entire first movement of the Mahler without stopping, and this time the piece came together with real power. Maya lost herself in the music, forgetting about Michael and her sore fingers and the weight of expectations. For these few minutes, there was only the sound, the glorious complex sound of 70 musicians creating something larger than themselves. When Rebecca finally called an end to the rehearsal at 4 o'clock, Maya felt like she had run a marathon. Every muscle in her body ached, and her mind was fuzzy with exhaustion. But she had survived. She had made it through her first day as a professional orchestra musician without any major disasters. As she packed up her violin, Ellen approached with a smile. "You did great today, Maya. Really impressive for your first rehearsal." "Thank you," Maya said. "It was intense. It always is with Rebecca conducting. She doesn't believe in easing people in gently." Ellen glanced around the room, then lowered her voice. "Listen, I wanted to give you a heads up about something. There's going to be a principal second violin audition in a few weeks. The position has been vacant since our last principal retired, and Simone has been sitting first chair temporarily. Maya looked over at Simone, who was engaged in conversation with another violinist. Is Simone going to audition? Definitely. So are a couple of other people in the section. And, Ellen paused meaningfully, Michael has been heavily involved in choosing the audition panel and setting the repertoire requirements. Why are you telling me this? Because, Ellen said carefully, you should audition too. You're absolutely capable of playing at that level, and it would be good for you to establish yourself early as someone who's ambitious and confident in your abilities. Maya felt a flutter of anxiety. Ellen, I just started. I've been in the orchestra for exactly 1 day. Auditioning for principal seems presumptuous. It's not presumptuous, it's strategic. Michael is going to be watching you anyway, looking for any sign of weakness. If you audition for principal and play well, even if you don't get the position, you send a message that you're serious and capable. You show him that you're not intimidated. Maya considered this. Ellen had been kind and supportive, and her advice seemed to come from genuine concern. But the thought of auditioning again, of subjecting herself to more of Michael's scrutiny, made Maya's stomach turn. I'll think about it, Maya said finally. Ellen nodded. That's all I ask. Just consider it. You have more talent than you seem to realize, Maya. Don't let fear hold you back from opportunities. That evening, Maya sat in her apartment with her violin, running through the most challenging passages from the day's rehearsal. Her fingers found the notes automatically now, muscle memory taking over where conscious thought had guided her during the morning. She thought about Ellen's suggestion, about the principal audition and what it would mean to put herself forward so soon after joining the orchestra. Part of her wanted to play it safe, to keep her head down and establish herself as a reliable section player before reaching for anything more ambitious. But another part of her remembered the feeling of playing the chaconne during her audition, the way the music had transformed her fear into power, the way she had proven everyone wrong who had doubted her. Maya's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from her father. How was your first day? She smiled and typed back, exhausting and wonderful. I think I'm going to like it here. Her father's response came quickly, I knew you would. I'm proud of you, Baba. Maya set down her phone and picked up her violin again. She played through the fast passage from the Mahler one more time, pushing the tempo even faster than Rebecca had requested. Her fingers stumbled over a few notes, but she pushed through, refusing to stop until she reached the end. Then she played it again, and again, until the passage flowed smoothly even at the increased speed. When she finally set down her violin for the night, Maya's hands were trembling with exhaustion, but she felt a quiet satisfaction. She had survived her first day. Tomorrow she would survive the second day, and the day after that, and eventually all these individual days would add up to a career. And maybe, if she was brave enough, she would audition for principal second violin. Maybe she would walk into another room where Michael sat in judgment, and maybe she would play so well that even he could not deny her talent. Maybe fear was not a reason to avoid challenges but rather a sign that something was worth pursuing. Maya looked at her violin where it rested in its case, the instrument that had been silent for 2 years and was now speaking again. She thought about all the music still waiting to be played, all the performances and rehearsals and moments of transcendence that might lie ahead. She thought about the girl who had served dim sum and practiced in storage rooms, and the woman who now sat in one of the country's finest orchestras. They were the same person, Maya realized. The struggles and the triumphs were not separate chapters but continuous threads in the same story. Everything she had been through, every sacrifice and disappointment and moment of doubt, had prepared her for this opportunity. She could not have appreciated it without having lost it first. Outside her window, Seattle was settling into evening. The rain had stopped, and the clouds were beginning to break apart, revealing patches of dark blue sky. Maya closed her violin case and allowed herself a moment of quiet pride. She had done it. Against all odds and despite every obstacle, she had found her way back to music. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Michael would still be watching with his critical eye, waiting for her to fail. The music would still be difficult, demanding hours of practice and unwavering focus. The other musicians would still be forming their opinions, deciding whether Maya Chen was truly worthy of her position. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, Maya was exactly where she belonged. 3 weeks later, Maya stood backstage at Benaroya Hall, adjusting her concert black for the 5th time. Tonight was the orchestra's first public performance of the season, and the house was nearly full. Through the heavy curtains, she could hear the murmur of the audience settling into their seats, programs rustling, excited conversations about the upcoming Mahler. Her hands were steady as she rosined her bow, but her mind raced with doubts. The rehearsals had gone well enough, though Michael continued to watch her with barely concealed skepticism. She had considered Ellen's advice about the principal audition and had quietly submitted her name 3 days ago. Michael's reaction when he saw the audition list had been carefully blank, which somehow felt more ominous than outright hostility. Rebecca appeared in the wings, immaculate in her tailored black suit. She gathered the orchestra with a brief pre-performance talk about trusting their preparation and supporting each other. Maya felt Simone squeeze her shoulder encouragingly as they made their way to the stage. The lights were blinding at first. Maya took her seat and focused on tuning, on the familiar ritual of preparation. The concert hall was beautiful, with warm wood and excellent acoustics. She could see her parents in the 5th row, her father beaming with pride despite the cane he still needed. Her mother held his hand tightly. Rebecca lifted her baton, and the world narrowed to music. The performance was transcendent. Maya disappeared into the sound, her violin voice merging seamlessly with the section. The Mahler unfolded with power and precision, each movement building on the last. During the lyrical second violin passages, Maya felt the same clarity she had experienced during her audition, that sense of the music flowing through her rather than from her. When the final notes faded and Rebecca lowered her baton, there was a moment of profound silence before the audience erupted. The applause was thunderous. Maya stood with her section as Rebecca acknowledged each part of the orchestra, her heart pounding with exhilaration and relief. Backstage, Ellen embraced her. "You were magnificent. Absolutely magnificent." Even David was grinning. "That lyrical section in the second movement, your tone was so pure it made me tear up." Michael approached as Maya was packing her violin. She braced herself, but his expression was different than she expected. "Not warm, exactly, but less hostile." "That was acceptable work tonight, Miss Chen," he said. Then, after a pause, "The principal audition is next Wednesday. I expect you'll be prepared." It was not praise, but it was not condemnation either. Maya met his eyes and nodded. "I will be." As she left the hall that night, violin case in hand and her parents waiting by the stage door, Maya felt something settle in her chest. She belonged here. Not because someone had given her permission or because she had proven herself beyond doubt, but because she had claimed this space through dedication and courage. The principal audition would come, and other challenges after that. Michael would probably never fully accept her, and there would be difficult performances and moments of self-doubt. But Maya had learned that she could survive uncertainty, could thrive despite obstacles. She had played one wrong note and stayed. She had faced impossible standards and met them. She had taken a gift that was nearly lost and fought to reclaim it. The rest was just music, and Maya knew how to play. The audition room felt smaller this time, or perhaps Maya had simply grown larger in the 3 weeks since joining the orchestra. She stood in the same corridor outside the conference room, but now the space held different memories. She was no longer the outsider hoping for acceptance. She was a working member of the Seattle Metropolitan Symphony, and today she was competing for principal second violin. 5 other musicians waited with her, including Simone. Her stand partner had nodded at Maya when she arrived but had not engaged in conversation. The atmosphere was thick with professional tension. Everyone here wanted the same position, and only one person would get it. The door opened and a familiar face appeared. Ellen was administering the auditions again, clipboard in hand. "Maya Chen, you're next." Maya entered the room and immediately noticed the difference in the panel composition. Michael sat in his usual central position, but the other seats were occupied by different people. There was the symphony's music director, someone from the board of directors, and several section leaders Maya recognized from rehearsals. This was a more official process than her initial audition, with higher stakes and more scrutiny. "Miss Chen," Michael began, his tone formal. "For this audition, you'll perform 2 contrasting pieces of your choice, followed by excerpts from our upcoming repertoire. You have 15 minutes total. Please begin when ready." Maya had chosen carefully. Her first piece was a movement from a Bach sonata, clean and precise, demonstrating her technical foundation. The second was a contemporary work, emotionally complex and technically demanding. She wanted to show range, to prove she could handle both traditional and modern repertoire with equal skill. She lifted her violin and began the Bach. The notes emerged with crystalline clarity, each phrase shaped with careful attention to the composer's architecture. She had practiced this piece hundreds of times, knew every shift and string crossing, every moment where the music breathed. As she played, Maya felt the familiar transformation, the way performance anxiety transmuted into focused energy. The panel listened with professional attention. Michael's expression remained neutral, but Maya noticed he was leaning forward slightly, engaged despite himself. When she finished the Bach, there was a brief pause before she moved into the contemporary piece. This was riskier territory. The composition used extended techniques, unconventional sounds drawn from the violin through preparation and unusual bowing. Some musicians found this kind of music gimmicky, but Maya heard genuine expression in it. She played with conviction, making bold interpretive choices, refusing to hide behind safe mediocrity. When she finished, Michael consulted his papers. "Now the excerpt from Shostakovich's 10th Symphony, second movement. You'll find it in the folder on the stand." Maya knew this passage. It was notoriously difficult, a relentless assault of rapid notes and harsh accents that pushed players to their technical limits. She had worked on it obsessively, knowing it would likely appear in any serious audition. She played it faster than necessary, demonstrating that she had reserve capacity even at extreme tempos. Her bow attacked the strings with controlled violence, producing the aggressive sound Shostakovich demanded. It was not pretty music, but it was powerful, and Maya delivered it with absolute commitment. The final note rang out. Maya lowered her violin and waited. The panel members were conferring quietly among themselves, their expressions serious. Michael was writing notes, his pen moving rapidly across the page. Finally, the music director spoke. "Thank you, Miss Chen. We'll notify all candidates of our decision by Friday. You're free to go." Maya packed her violin and left the room, her heart still racing from the intensity of performance. In the hallway, she passed the next candidate, a young man who looked terrified. She gave him an encouraging nod before heading toward the exit. 2 days later, Maya was running through a particularly challenging passage during her morning practice when her phone rang. The caller ID showed the symphony office. Her stomach clenched as she answered. "Maya, this is Rebecca." The conductor's voice was warm but professional. "I wanted to personally inform you that the audition panel has made their decision regarding the principal second violin position." Maya closed her eyes, bracing for disappointment. "We'd like to offer you the position, effective immediately. Your playing demonstrated exceptional technical skill and musical maturity." The panel was unanimous in their decision. Well, almost unanimous. Almost unanimous. Which meant Michael had voted against her. But he had been outvoted by the rest of the panel, his opinion overruled by colleagues who recognized Maya's abilities. "I accept," Maya said, her voice catching slightly. "Thank you. Thank you so much." After the call ended, Maya sat in stunned silence. Principal second violin. It meant more responsibility, more scrutiny, more pressure. It also meant validation, respect, and a significant increase in salary. She had been in the orchestra less than a month, and already she was being promoted to a leadership position. That evening's rehearsal had a different quality. Maya took her new seat at the front of the second violin section, aware of the mixed reactions from her colleagues. Some, like Ellen and David, beamed with genuine happiness. Others were more reserved, their congratulations polite but guarded. Simone was gracious, telling Maya she deserved the position, though Maya could see the disappointment behind her smile. Michael said nothing. He took his place as concertmaster and ran through his warm-up exercises, never once looking in Maya's direction. But when Rebecca started the rehearsal and they began playing, Maya felt his attention like a physical weight. He was listening to every note she produced, analyzing her leadership of the section, waiting for mistakes that would justify his initial judgment. Maya played with fierce concentration. As principal, she was responsible for setting bowings, for making interpretive decisions that the rest of the section would follow. She watched Rebecca's conducting carefully, translating the conductor's gestures into specific technical execution. When there were questions about phrasing or dynamics, she consulted with Simone and the other section members, building consensus rather than imposing her will. Slowly, over the course of the 3-hour rehearsal, something shifted. The second violin section began to coalesce around Maya's leadership. They matched her bowings, followed her interpretive choices, responded to her musical suggestions. By the time Rebecca called for a break, the section was functioning with new precision and unity. Michael approached during the break, his expression unreadable. Maya braced herself for criticism or coldness. Instead, he said quietly, "The section sounds better. More focused." It was not effusive praise, but coming from Michael, it was significant. Maya nodded, accepting the compliment without gloating. "Thank you. I'm trying to serve the music and support the musicians around me." "See that you continue to do so," Michael said. Then, after a pause, "I voted against your appointment. I want you to know that. I believe you're too inexperienced for a principal position, and I think the panel made their decision based on emotion rather than judgment." Maya met his eyes steadily. "I appreciate your honesty. I hope I can prove you wrong." "Perhaps you already have," Michael said. "But consistency matters more than a single impressive audition. Don't let success make you complacent." He walked away before Maya could respond, leaving her to process the strange interaction. It was not exactly an apology or an endorsement, but it was acknowledgement. Michael might never become her ally, but perhaps he could eventually become something other than her adversary. The season progressed with demanding intensity. Maya threw herself into the work, arriving early for rehearsals and staying late to help section members who struggled with difficult passages. She studied scores obsessively, listening to multiple recordings to understand different interpretive approaches. She built relationships with other principals, learning how to navigate orchestra politics and collaborate effectively with strong personalities. And she continued to improve. Each performance taught her something new about leading a section, about balancing individual expression with collective cohesion. The music became richer as she developed confidence in her leadership role. 6 months after her initial audition, Maya stood on stage at Benaroya Hall for the orchestra's season finale. They were performing Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, a work of such emotional power and technical difficulty that it served as a culmination of everything they had worked toward. As Rebecca lifted her baton for the final movement, Maya felt complete certainty about her place in this ensemble. She belonged here not because someone had given her permission, but because she had earned it through dedication, courage, and unwavering commitment to musical excellence. The final chord of the Ninth Symphony resonated through the hall, and Maya knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.